I'm Tony Edwards. I'm Director of Postgraduate Programmes in the Department of Management and also Deputy Head of the Department of Management. I'm also Director of one of the Master's Programmes, so it's in that capacity that I'm talking to you today about the range of our programmes. There are going to be three main aspects to this session. One is me talking about the programmes. So I'll talk a bit about the structure of the programmes, what we expect, how they're informed by our research, and take questions as we go along. I've then asked Graham Cookson, one of the academics in the department, to do a kind of taster lecture about a piece of research that he's been involved in, which has attracted a good deal of publicity and attention. So there's a kind of taster lecture showing how our teaching is informed by our research. And then I've asked a panel of existing students to share their experiences with you. So we have Veronica from the marketing programme and Lily from the HR programme. Others are arriving in the next 30 minutes. So we should have representation from each of the 5 programmes. And I've asked them to say a few words about their experiences, maybe what they wish they'd known when they were at the stage that you're at, but they know now, something along those lines. And then there'll be a chance for you to ask questions to the 5 of those people in a panel format. And then there'll be some drinks. So this department's existed for just over 2 decades. I've been in it for about half of that time. It's a department that has come a long way in a short space of time. We began our life as quite a low status department within the college, actually. Management was seen not as a well-developed academic subject a quarter of a century ago, and what management teaching was people doing engineering degrees who maybe did want to do a little bit of management as maybe a quarter of their degree. That's essentially what the initial management department with a very small number of people did. We've come an enormously long way from there to a department which is flourishing in its own right. It's grown hugely. We're in another phase of expansion, so that we should soon have just over 50 academic staff across a range of the main disciplines or subject areas within management. And we've done that in ways which have improved our programmes. We now have a fleet of postgraduate programmes as opposed to one when I first joined a decade ago. We have a large and flourishing undergraduate programme as well. I mean, crucially, I think for any academic department, we have a very, very strong research culture. So you may know about the joys of the research assessment exercise. You may have heard something about the way in which the UK government and its various agencies try and rate departments according to their research and then divvy up money according to how good or bad they think departments are. I'll spare you the details of that, but suffice to say that in the last exercise, which finished about 4 years ago, we finished 5th in the country in the field of management and business studies, which was a huge achievement. We'd been right down the bottom in the first of these exercises in the early 1990s. And what that means is really something very important for our master's teaching. Our master's teaching is informed by our research. You won't be taught by people who are one chapter ahead of you in the textbook. You'll be taught by people who know their field very well, who are actively researching, publishing, engaging in knowledge transfer activities with organisations, in policy-related debates at national and supranational level. And it really affects the quality of your experience. It affects the quality of your experience during the taught part of the programme. It affects the quality of your experience as when you're supervised, as when you do your dissertation. So a really crucial aspect of the way we go about our teaching is for all of our teaching, but particularly our master's level teaching, to be informed by our research. And so we have these 5 programmes, and I'm hoping that there'll be people holding offers currently from each of those programmes. Perhaps I could just do a show of hands so we know where the distribution lies. Which of you is holding an offer for the Human Resource Management programme? Okay, so there's 6 or 7 there. Public sector policy management. Okay, we've got 3 or 4 there. International marketing. Good. International management. Okay, and accounting accountability and financial management. Okay, we've got a bit of a spread, representation from all of the programs. I'll do my best to field questions on the detail of each of those programs, though I know international management best as the director of it, and Graham is soon to be the director of the public sector policy management program. I think we could probably field most questions about some of the other programs. Welcome, come in and take a seat. So let me say a little bit about the structure without going into detail on any one of those programs. All of our programs have a common element to the structure. They're not all exactly structured in the same way, but they do have this common element. So in the two main academic terms, the first of which starts in late September and runs through until just before Christmas, you'll be doing 4 modules. And those are assessed in the main, it varies a bit by programme, in the main through examinations in the first week of January. So with some variations, may not hold across every module and every programme. There's forms of assessment is principally through examination in January, maybe some sort of coursework element on some modules. And then in the second week of term, which is normally around the sort of 14th or so of January, depending on how the days fall in the year, you then begin the second semester modules. You do 4 more modules, again assessed either through coursework during that semester or through examinations in May. So our existing master students are soon to finish or have just finished their exams. You've finished, Lily, I guess. Veronica, have you finished? You got 1 or 2 more next week? Yeah. Well, it's very good of you to come along in the circumstances. So examinations run up until basically the end of May. All of our master's students are required to compile a dissertation, an independent and original piece of work I'll say something more about in a moment, and that has to be handed in by early September. So it's a 12-month programme. It runs from just before the end of September until early September the following year. Are there any questions at this point? Okay. Sorry, yeah.
I have a question. What do you mean by coursework?
Well, it varies a bit from module to module. It may be an essay, so you'd be set an essay and have to write a 2,000-word essay on a particular topic. It might be a case study that you're required to evaluate what went wrong or what went right.
Is assessed? Or
Yeah.
Just, okay.
Yeah. All those forms of coursework that I mentioned are assessed. Or it might be a presentation. There are also some assessed presentations. So in terms of what's expected of you, with those 4 modules, most of the modules have either 2 or 3 hours a week in contact time. So you don't need to be brilliant at maths to work out. That's going to come to about 10 hours a week of contact time. Now you might be thinking, oh, that doesn't sound like much, and I can take a part-time job and reckon on seeing some sites in London, if you don't know London very well. There's a slight problem with that, which is that each module, there's an expectation the college has that each module, which is a 15-credit module, requires 150 hours of work to do well in it. Okay? 150 hours of work. Now that might only include about 20 hours when you're in the classroom. And the rest will be compiling a piece of coursework if there is one, preparing for tutorials. There are weekly tutorials on almost all of our modules, preparing for the examination, sitting the examination, and so on. Now you've got 8 modules, 150 hours each. That's 1,200 hours. You divide that back by 8 because it runs from the end of September to the end of May, and you've got 150 hours a month, very nearly 40 hours a week. You should think of this as a full-time course, full-time programme. That's not to say you can't squeeze other things in, and one of the joys of being at university is that you do that. So there's a very good social network within most of our programmes. There are a range of clubs and societies that you can join at King's. You're located at the heart of, I think, one of the world's great cities. There's lots of things you can do besides, but don't come thinking this is only 10, 15, 20 hours a week. It isn't. To do well on this programme, on each of the programs, you need to think of it as a full-time course. Any part-time work that you might do, and many people do work part-time, has to be fitted in around your studies and not the other way round. Okay, so we do expect high levels of attendance. It's extremely important if you're going to learn effectively. We do also see it as part of the collegiality of the programs. You know, you're not herded into huge lecture halls of 300 students where you don't know who anyone is. That's not the experience you have of being a master's student at King's. It's important that people attend and get to know each other, participate in group work, in tutorials and so on, if you're going to maximise that sense of collegiality. And so, as I said a moment ago, part-time work, we completely recognise the commercial imperatives that many people fund their master's study through part-time work. That's fine, but it just has to be fitted in around your studies. And I mean, linked to this issue of what's expected of you, you've also got to prepare well for tutorials. Almost all modules have a format where you've got some sort of task to do for the following week. Normally it'd be reading articles, it may be a case study preparation, some sort of presentation. The tutorials, which are essentially weekly, will only work if people are prepared and engaged with them. And that's our experience. We get very, very good master's students. They all want to do that, and merely sort of shaping expectations at this stage about what's involved. It's not an easy ride. We select very, very good students who are all capable of passing our master's programs. The vast majority of people who come onto a master's program do pass and do very well. But you won't do so well if you see it as an easy ride. It isn't that. Many of you might have done a dissertation as part of an undergraduate degree, but it's a requirement as part of the master's degree. All of our master's degrees by definition have a dissertation as a part of them, and it's essentially worth a third of the credits of the total programme. It's very, very important in determining your overall performance. It's how well you do on the dissertation. Formally, the dissertation process gets going in earnest once the taught part of the programme is finished at the end of May. But we require students to be thinking about what the dissertation topic will be. I mean, almost from the time that they join, actually. They have to give an indication in the spring as to what their proposed topic will be. We use that to allocate a supervisor. So almost as soon as you come, you should be thinking about possible dissertation topics. And certainly mulling over that during the autumn term, and by soon after Christmas, you should be in a position to be able to say, well, this is my chosen topic, which you can then discuss with a member of staff to see whether it's viable, and then things proceed from there. So it's worth a third of the overall degree. It's an extended piece of work carried out principally in the summer, though with some of the preparation done before, then in the spring. It's original, it's independent. It's not totally independent in the sense you have a supervisor who will meet you periodically to guide you, to comment on a proposal, to discuss how your strategy for gathering data is going, to reflect come around July time on how you might write up your findings and structure your dissertation. But it's a largely independent piece of work, and very important as I say, in determining your overall degree result. I think most of our students find it very useful in demonstrating when they're applying for jobs that they are capable of carrying out a piece of independent research. So it has employability elements to it, as well as being important in its own right in the programme. Just a few quick comments about sort of things that you can take advantage of when you're here. I mean, Janet, when she was talking about the school's approach, indicated that student opinions matter to us. They do matter a lot, and we ask on each programme for the group of students to elect representatives to speak for them. And they speak for them partly through formal meetings of the staff student committee. But they speak for them more frequently than that. All of our programme directors want their reps to engage with them. If there's things which maybe not quite the way you'd expected or the way you'd hoped, and we hope there won't be too many, but if there are some, we don't want students to sit on those thoughts. So we want them to tell us about them. and see whether we can do anything about them. And the main channel for that is through representation. So we take the issue of student representation very, very seriously. It's a key part of us managing to respond to the wishes and feelings of the existing students, but also to improve year on year. So representation on committees, on the staff student committee, but representation in their dialogue, constant dialogue with programme director, is a very important part of our programmes. We also have a number of mechanisms designed to support you in terms of welfare. I mean, every student is allocated a personal tutor. If there are things which are affecting your performance that you want someone to know about, then the personal tutor is your point of contact. You can also use your personal tutor as a source of advice about your studies, about what comes after your studies. So personal tutor is very important. We also have a range of other mechanisms, bodies within the college that help deal with the issue of student welfare. So the counselling unit, for example, which we hope none of you will have to use, but if you do, it's there. There are other support structures within the college too. And then finally, I mean, Janet mentioned employability, and one of the things that we are in the process of improving is the things that we do to help your employability, falling under the broad heading of professional development. So we have set up a graduate professional programme in which there are guest speakers who come and talk on a range of policy or practitioner related issues. Early evening sessions followed by drinks events, which you can talk informally to the guest speaker. We also have a number of workshops on particular skills. So in conjunction with the career service, we run workshops on things like networking, or also more practical things like writing CV and interview practice. So there's a range of mechanisms within the broad area of professional development that are either done within the department or linked between the department and the rest of the college that help in the area of professional development and employability. So that gives you some sort of overview about our programmes and the structure of them, the things that we offer. I'm very happy to take questions at this stage, if there are any. Okay, well, in that case, let's save the main discussion for when there's the panel of students. And what we'll turn to next then is the taster lecture, which my colleague Graham has very kindly offered to give. So I mentioned at the beginning it's a piece of research which has attracted a good deal of media attention, and Graham would be too modest to say this, so I'll say it on his, about him. I mean, he's done an excellent piece of research on the reform of legal aid that has proved a little bit controversial, and I think he'll tell you a bit about it so you can see why. Graham, presume you're happy to take questions as you go along? Yes. Yep. Graham.
Okay, well, hello everyone. My name's Graham Cookson, also from the department, and I'll be around at the end as well if you've got any questions specifically about the Public Services Policy and Management Programme, which I currently teach on, and will be shortly taking over the role of director. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about this report that I wrote. It was commissioned by the Law Society, and they wanted me to look at the unintended consequences, so the stuff that the government didn't admit to when it proposed changes to the legal aid system in the UK. So I guess before we go, the key thing is to just make sure everyone understands what we mean by legal aid. And essentially it's a system in which people who can't afford legal advice have that advice paid for them by the state. But also the other key part of that is that solicitors that sign up to provide legal aid do so at a dramatically reduced rate. So it's about a quarter or a third of commercial private sector legal rates. It's been going for well over 60 years. It was introduced as part of the whole beverage change, the introduction of the welfare state. And it was really about addressing this problem of equality of access. Rich people could afford legal advice, they could get the best solicitors, they could go to court, they could get their way with almost everything. And many people, if you didn't have access to legal aid, you simply gave in. Okay, so there's an imbalance of power. And it's been said by Anthony Hoyle that it's one of the three pillars of the welfare state. That's with education and healthcare. And it's a bit of a myth that everybody seems to get legal aid, that it's a really expensive, big system. But actually 80% of people who get it are in the bottom income quartile. Okay. Now, most of you are about to become students, so you may think, well, okay, that seems like quite a lot of people. Anyone have a guess at what that income would be? How much would you be earning in a year if you were in the bottom quartile? So the bottom 25% of earners. 8,000. 8,000. Okay. Anything else? 10,000. We're going up. No? Okay. Well, the top of that 25%, everybody earns below £5,000 a year. And the median, so the average of that 25%, is about £3,500 a year, okay? So we're not talking about people who are on a lot of money, okay? So we're talking about some relatively poor people. Now, set against that very low income, anybody have any idea how much rip-off solicitors charge in London, where they're more expensive, for a divorce? And we're talking about an undefended divorce. So this is where a husband and wife are getting divorced, and they agree, and this is very rare, on who gets what. Okay, so there's no contention, there's no kind of let's go to court and fight about this. We agree, just draw up a document, take it to the court. How much would that cost you in London, on average? No, for the whole thing.
600 per hour.
Okay. Anything else? It's going to cost you £1,000 just to get a divorce when you agree. It's going to cost you about £5,000 for a divorce when you disagree. Okay? So what we're talking about here, and that divorce is relatively straightforward, okay? There's hundreds of thousands of divorces. Now, if you start thinking about more complex areas of law like clinical negligence, when you want to sue the NHS for medical malpractice, that's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of pounds in legal fees. And you're expected to try and afford this with a very low income. So today I'm going to talk about 4 things. I'm going to briefly talk about why the government would introduce this policy, so what's their rationale, and then also the rationale for the study, so why is it interesting to look at this. And then I'm going to tackle a couple of myths that the government were spreading about legal aid and the legal aid scheme in the run-up to the law, and then going to talk about the key findings. So what did I find? What were the outcomes of my research? And then if we have time at the end, I'll talk about some of my observations about working with the Ministry of Justice. So, okay, so what's this all about? Well, the history, you've got to have lived in a cave if you didn't realise that we had a global financial crisis. And the coalition government came to power, and their response to that was what they called fiscal responsibility, to which everybody else means belt-tightening, okay? And they made a commitment then in that budget in 2010 that they would eradicate the structural deficit by 2015, okay? So effectively we're going to have a balanced budget in up cycles and down cycles. And they thought it was going to cost £99 billion per annum trimmed out of the expenditure to meet that. Okay, and that's current spending, so that's not even capital expenditure. We're probably talking £140 billion per annum is being cut out of the real budget. So how did they implement that? Well, they had a spending review where all the departments get told what their budget allocation is for the next period, and on average each department had to cut 19%, okay? And some got off easier, like the NHS, some got off worse. So the MOJ, Ministry of Justice, that we're looking at here, they had to find 23% savings, okay? So imagine trying to strip out a quarter of your budget. So here we are, the Ministry of Justice, the ministers, Ken Clarke, sat down, and he has to find £2 billion per annum to cut out of his budget. And he's looking around and he's got, what has he got? He's got prisons, brilliant. Well, let's cut spending on prisons. What we're going to do, just let everyone out? That's not going to work. So he's looking around for areas to tackle, and a big one is going to be the legal aid budget, because that's about a quarter of their total budget at £2.1 billion per annum. So it's a big pie to tackle. And the argument that they had was this: this expenditure is too great. We spend far too much money on legal aid. Look at comparison countries like New Zealand. And what is special about legal aid? It shouldn't be immune to public sector cuts, just like defence, just like policing, just like everything else. So you're going to have the knife taken to you. And their solution was to trim £450 million per annum. But that's even worse, because that comes specifically out of the civil legal aid budget of £900 million. So basically half of the civil and family legal aid budget is being cut. There's no real change to the criminal bit. So how did they do this? Well, they introduced a bill into Parliament called the Legal Aid, Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Bill at the time, LASPO. And it's now an act because it became law at the beginning of the month. It will be implemented from next year. And it was highly controversial. I mean, the NHS bill and the social care bill, that was highly controversial. This is probably second behind that in terms of the level of controversy. There were 14 defeats during its passing through Parliament. And part of that was down to the work that I did. House of Lords here, we've got Lord Howarth. I would do an old guy's kind of posh accent, but I won't because it's embarrassing. But he said, I hope that it will look, it being the government, at the arguments and figures put forward by Dr. Cookson of King's College, the central case on which the minister relies, that all this, miserable though it may be, is inescapably necessary in order to reduce the deficit, is profoundly flawed. I hope that on report we will see major amendments to the bill. And indeed there were 14, 15 amendments to the bill, largely around the work that I was doing on whether or not it was going to make any money. And in the end, the government tagged it as a spending bill. And any of the people who studied government before, the rule is if it's a spending bill that you're not allowed to vote against it, no matter which side of the house you are. So they forced it through as though it were a budget. So how are they going to make £450 million savings? Well, they tweak a little bit with eligibility, that is who is covered. Quite a big chunk of it comes from the fees, so taking a haircut to the hourly rates that solicitors can charge. But the vast majority here, 60% of the savings, come from what's called scope. So that's what type of law is covered. So family law is a type of scope. And I was looking specifically at what is the impact of removing these whole areas of law out of scope, family law, clinical negligence, and so on. So within the area of scope, the big hit is family. 61% of the family budget has disappeared. That basically means everything's gone. The only cases that remain in scope are for what's called public family law, so baby P cases, like those kind of things. Clinical negligence, 4%, and social welfare. And those three things are what I focused on in my report, and that's about 86% of the savings, mainly because they're the most contentious. So the government, whenever it passes a law, it has to come out with an impact assessment in which it owns up to what it thinks the benefits of this law is going to be in financial terms and the costs. And these are what it thought were going to be the costs of the legal aid bill. Increased criminality, some idea that you can't get access to your child, so you kidnap them and run away to France or something. Increased transfer payments, you can't say, you can't get part of your husband's pension through a divorce, so you might be reliant on state benefits for the rest of your life, things like this. So the government owned up to them, but when it came to putting a figure on it, it said that the lack of robust evidence base means that we are unable to draw conclusions as to whether wider economic and social costs are likely to result from the programme of reform or to estimate their size. So basically they said, yeah, there's loads of stuff that's bad about this bill. We haven't got a clue how much it's going to cost, so we'll call it zero, okay, because that seems right. So what you've got is £450 million saving and a zero cost, even though we know that that's frankly ridiculous. So in response to this, going crazy here, the Justice Select Committee said that they were surprised that the government was proposing to make such changes without assessing their likely impact on spending from the public purse. And they asked them to do that. And basically, that was the aim of this study. I was to look at the likely impact of the legal aid changes. So the government had two main arguments that I think are myths about why legal aid should be reformed. The first one was that it's too expensive, okay, without defining what expensive means. So this is a bar chart. If you come and do PSBM or you do stats with me, you'll spend a lot of time looking at bar charts, maths, all sorts of stuff. It's good. So what we got, a decade here of spending, and each of those bars there represents total expenditure, and then they're split between the light green, which is on top, which is the criminal legal aid, and the bottom bit is the civil. And if you look, it's pretty remarkably stable over that decade, really. I mean, it's not moving by a lot. And actually, if you take the beginning and the end of the decade, civil legal aid, which is the thing being cut, has fallen by 6%, okay? So it's actually lower at the end of the decade. But the world doesn't stay still. Over that decade, the UK economy grew by 15%. The population grew by 6%. And this is against a backdrop of increased spending under Labour. The police got 50% extra spending. The health service a quarter. So whilst everything else was spending much more money, we were actually spending less on legal aid. So I don't think it's true that we spend too much money. And then there's what I've called the New Zealand problem, which is whenever Ken Clark was wheeled out, he comes up with this parrot-like argument that we spend so much more, 4 times as much per capita than New Zealand spends on legal aid, and they have a similar legal system, okay? Well, anyone been to New Zealand? We're not very similar, okay? What type of law is covered, for example? Does it cover the range of cases that we cover? Who's covered? Is it everybody that falls within a certain income level, or is it just a small minority? And the big one is purchasing power parity, which is an economic term, and we economists like these kind of things. But basically it means how much can your dollar buy you in the UK or can buy you in New Zealand, and money goes a lot further in New Zealand generally. So actually, even though they're spending less, they probably buys more for their money. And so what if we spend more? The question is that value for money as a society? Do we think that we get something out of it? So the key findings. On the left here, we've got what the government was proposing to save from the 3 areas of law. So family law was about 160 million, and then we had social welfare law, and then clinical negligence. So this is what it thought it was going to save. And this is what I predict it will cost to offset against that. And with some areas of law, this is clinical negligence. You don't need to be a mathematician to see that's considerably bigger than that. And so for every £1 that the Ministry of Justice saves, the NHS will lose £3. Okay? Every £1 that they save costs the NHS £3. And we'll talk in a minute about why that is. And then with other areas of law, we'll see that they don't necessarily save as much as they would like. And when we combine that, the government's lucky to save around 40% of what it predicts, okay? And that's being generous. If you have the time to read my report, you'll see there's loads of things we can't estimate. And generally, as an academic, I tended to be more cautious than, say, the Law Society might have liked me to be. And so that's probably an underestimate. So what we're looking at here is a reform which takes legal aid away from 600,000 people every year and is going to save less than £100 million a year. Okay? I mean, we can save £100 million probably just by not doing the gardens at the Olympic site. This is not a lot of money. Okay? The government wants to spend £99 billion, and this isn't the way to go. So where do these costs come from? Well, we've got lots of them here. What we have here, 52.8 billion. We've got a big cost here for what we might call alternative advice. So the government's reason for cutting legal aid is there are other things you can do. If you want a divorce, you don't need a lawyer. You can go to the Citizens Advice Bureau and see some very well-trained volunteers, and they can tell you how to get a divorce yourself. And they may be good or they may be bad, but the point is the government thinks that that doesn't cost them any money. But Citizen Advice, Shelter, all of these organisations are charities. And how are charities funded? They're funded through money out of your pocket, right? Everybody donates. And when you donate, they claim tax back from the Treasury. So for every £1 that you give that charity, they also get about 55% back from the government, depending upon taxpayers' rates and things. So actually, the government... The Ministry of Justice saves money, but the Treasury loses money if people have to spend more money at the Citizens' Advice propping them up. The government's very keen on mediation, especially in family cases. So the argument goes, you're too willing to litigate, get solicitors involved. You should sit down with a mediator and mediate, sort this problem out between you. And so it's going to fund mediation. But the government reckons that even though it's cutting 600,000 people's legal aid, that only 4,000 extra people will seek mediation each year, even though it's not capping the numbers. So I predicted, through some nice modelling that you can read in the report, that we're going to see many, many, many more people, 20, 30, 40,000 people using mediation each year, which comes at considerable cost. Other areas that are important, people will give up. If you can't get legal advice, you might just give up on your problem. And that could be really serious if you've got, say, you have a child and during birth it gets a brain injury and you have to look after them for the rest of your life. You might have gone to court to try and get money off the NHS for that. But if you no longer do that, you're going to be reliant on the state forever. And so there's costs to giving up. I'm not sure how long we've been talking for, but I'm happy to come back to this at the end and talk about any of this in detail. But here are the headlines really. Those in greatest need will suffer. The bottom 80% of people in the bottom 25% of the income bracket, they're relatively poor. It's a false economy. MOJ may save money, but it simply shift it to other parts of government. There's a health warning in here that there's so much stuff that we couldn't estimate that we really think that this number is going to be significantly bigger. And in some areas, like with clinical negligence, the cost is going to be greater than the saving. And it's absolutely ridiculous that the government thought that they would cut legal aid for clinical negligence where it's going to cost them 3 times as much as they save. And the one thing I did learn was that the MOJ has very poor data, hasn't got a clue what's happening, and I won't say it because we've got a camera, but you can ask me afterwards, about how they came up with some of their figures. Okay, so how do we summarise this? Well, just 2 words really. It's a false economy. It's a big waste of time. We have an idea in the UK that we have a right to justice. It goes all the way back to the Magna Carta. It goes all the way through most of the principles that we have in this country. We have a right to justice. And even Ken Clarke has said several times that access to justice is a hallmark of a civil society, including in the introduction to the bill that basically destroyed legal aid, which was the key way we have of ensuring access to justice. So the question that I keep getting asked at all the interviews I've done and all the presentations is, why did the government do this? And I have no answer. So you might want to think on that. I haven't got a clue. Why would they do this? I mean, if you want, you can download the full report, KCL report, tiny URL, and contact details if you want them. But you can find us all on the web. We're all up there. Okay? Fine.